Welcome back to the deep dive. Sometimes the biggest stories about global shifts, they aren't hidden in massive industries.
No, sometimes you find them by zooming way in, right? On the tiny, maybe essential parts of our world.
Exactly. And today, we're doing just that.
We are taking a deep dive into the market for plastic bicycle cleats.
Yeah, I know what you might be thinking. Plastic cleats. Those little things.
Uh-huh. The small, often overlooked bits that connect your cycling shoes to your pedals, in a clipless system.
It might sound, well, super niche, but we've got this market research analysis here. It's pretty detailed, gives us a growth outlook, regional trends, all for this one specific product.
Yeah. So our mission today is really to unpack these numbers, sort of cut through the noise, and see what larger story this little piece of plastic is telling us about global trends.
It's your shortcut, really, to seeing that bigger picture. The one hidden, maybe, right there on your bike.
Okay, so let's start with the basics then. What are these plastic bicycle cleats?
Essentially, they're crucial if you're using clipless pedals.
Right.
Don't think of them like a lock and key. They attach your shoe firmly to the pedal.
And that connection, it's not just for, stability, is it? It's about power.
Exactly. It lets you transfer power more efficiently
Right.
because you can push down and pull up on the pedals.
Makes sense. And the plastic ones are popular. Why? Well, they're lightweight, generally cost less than metal ones, and they work with a lot of the modern shoe and pedal systems out there. They're pretty standard gear if you're getting more serious about cycling or, competing.
So, okay, it's fairly simple part, seems pretty mature as a technology. The question the data raises immediately is, why? Why is the market for just plastic cleats growing so much?
Right. It feels like such a tiny detail.
But the numbers, well, they seem to be telling a much bigger story about what's happening globally.
And those numbers are pretty compelling. Let's look
Yeah.
at the global market value. Our source says plastic bicycle cleats. Back in 2021, that was a $247.4 million market.
Okay, 247 million. Then fast forward just a few years, and it's expected to hit, $310 million by 2025. Yep, 310 million. But here's where it gets really interesting. The long-term forecast, they're projecting $486.7 million by 2033.
Wow. That's nearly double the market size in just over a decade.
It is.
And that growth works out to a compound annual growth rate, a CAGR, of 5.8%.
5.8%, which for a component like this, that feels remarkably strong, right?
Yeah.
Consistent expansion.
Yeah, absolutely. This isn't just people replacing worn-out cleats. That kind of growth, it signals more people are actually adopting the technology, maybe cycling more intensely, or both.
So, okay, what's driving this? What are the big forces pushing up demand for these, specific bits of plastic globally?
Well, the source material points to several key factors, and they really connect to these major shifts happening everywhere.
Okay.
Well, one big one is just the increasing fitness culture worldwide. More people focusing on health, wellness.
And cycling's a huge part of that for many.
It is. And as people get more serious about fitness cycling, they often look for ways to get more efficient, right?
Yeah.
And that leads them straight to clipless pedals and the cleats they need.
Makes sense. It's also tied to, evolving cycling trends themselves, isn't it? The rise of gravel biking, e-bikes where you still want efficient pedaling, just recreational cycling becoming more popular generally.
And crucially, there's this big growth in urban mobility.
Yeah.
Cities pushing cycling, as an alternative to cars.
Active lifestyles, eco-friendly transport.
Exactly. So for lots of urban commuters cycling regularly, efficiency starts to matter more. That makes clipless systems more attractive.
Right. Then you add in, tech advancements, making gear better and maybe more accessible, people being more aware of the health benefits, more folks participating in cycling events.
Yeah, at all levels, from local races to bigger competitions.
All these big trends kind of funnel down and drive demand for components like these cleats. It's a perfect little case study, actually.
It really is. Shows how these major lifestyle and societal shifts show up in very specific product markets.
So let's zoom in a bit. Where are these global trends actually hitting the ground hardest? The data gives us this regional breakdown, and it's fascinating to see the different patterns.
Okay, where should we start? North America.
Yeah, let's do North America. The market there, it's...
This audio was created with podcastle.ai.
Where should we start? North America.
Yeah, let's do North America. The market there, it's projected to reach $144.5 million by 2033.
Okay, 144.5 million, and the U.S. is the big driver there.
Definitely. The U.S. is projected to hit almost $100 million, $99.3 million on its own by then.
Wow. What about Canada and Mexico?
Canada also shows strong growth, heading towards just over $31 million, 31.2 M by 2033. Mexico's interesting too, projected for $14 million.
Yeah. Ooh.
And the source specifically calls out that Mexico's growth is being driven by more urban cycling adoption.
Ah, so there's that direct link back to the urban mobility trend we talked about. More city commuters, perhaps, upgrading their gear.
Seems likely. Okay, let's cross the Atlantic. Europe. It's still the biggest market overall, right?
Yeah, projected to hit $175.7 million by 2033, which, makes sense given the really strong established cycling cultures there.
For sure. And we see steady growth across the board.
Pretty much. Consistent growth in key countries. The UK market projected over $35 million, 35.3 M. Germany, over $30 million, 30.6 M. France, over $22 million, 22.5 M by 2033.
Italy. Spain.
Also solid expansion, both projected to hit over $18 million. Italy slightly more, Spain slightly more at $18 for 4 Ms. Italy at $19. No, Italy at $19. Spain at $18 for its fence. Even smaller places like Luxembourg show modest growth.
Okay, so Europe's already big, but the growth is steady. Continuing popularity for sport, transport.
Right, but then if you look east, the picture changes. It gets, faster in some places.
Asia Pacific,
Right.
highlighted as one of the fastest growing regions, yeah.
Definitely. Projected to reach $109.3 million by 2033. The numbers there show a much steeper climb.
And China is leading that chart.
Dramatically. Projected to soar to over $43 million, 43.3 M by 2033. And the report explicitly links this to rising cycling trends and health awareness.
So that suggests maybe a lot of new cyclists coming in and adopting performance gear pretty quickly.
That's what it sounds like. India's another standout. Projected to more than double its 2021 figure, hitting $13.4 million by 2033.
Wow.
Japan, South Korea, Australia also healthy projected growth. Japan nearing $20 million, South Korea over $9 million, Australia over $7 million.
And Southeast Asia.
As a region, projected for over $12 million. So the story in Asia Pacific, it's not just growth, it feels like accelerated adoption, driven by that health consciousness, changing lifestyles.
Interesting. Okay, let's head south. Latin America. What's the picture there?
Total market projected to reach $14.8 million by 2033. The source specifically calls out Brazil, hitting that figure.
So smaller numbers overall compared to Europe or North America.
Right, but the growth trajectory is significant. Argentina, Colombia, Peru, Chile, they all show really strong percentage growth from their 2021 levels.
Suggests increasing adoption across the region then.
Exactly. Argentina projected for $5 million, Colombia for $3.9 million, Peru $1.4 million, Chile $2.6 million by 2033. It's picking up steam.
Okay, last region, Middle East and Africa.
Yeah. The source calls the growth here moderate but steady. Turkey's projected to reach over $4 million, 4.3 M by 2033. Egypt, over $2 million, 2.1 Ember.
And the rest.
Rest of the Middle East projected over $2.8 million. The source didn't really give specific country data for Africa beyond Egypt.
So maybe less widespread adoption there currently, or perhaps just less data available right now.
Could be either, yeah. But what's really striking is how this detailed regional picture just reinforces that global view,
Yeah, it does. The growth is robust, but it's also really geographically diverse. It's not just happening in one or two traditional cycling spots.
Exactly. It shows those core drivers we talked about: fitness, urban mobility, lifestyle changes. They're powerful forces everywhere, shaping demand in mature markets like Europe and North America, while also fueling this rapid acceleration we see in emerging economies across Asia and Latin America.
All reflected through the lens of this, tiny piece of plastic. Most people probably never even notice.
So what this whole deep dive into plastic bicycle cleats really shows us, I think, is that even the most specific, kind of minor product market can act as a really sensitive indicator.
Yeah, an indicator of much larger global shifts.
We started with this small bike part.
And uncovered this multi-million-dollar market projected for really significant growth.
All propelled by these worldwide changes in how we think about health, how we move through cities, how we build activity into our lives.
It just powerfully illustrates how these big trends translate into actual consumer demand, right down to the smallest bits of our gear.
Yeah.
So it leaves us with a thought, doesn't it? A question for you to chew on based on all this.
Which is?
Well, if these trends in health, the environment, urban living, if they can create such a clear, measurable impact on the market for something as specific as plastic bicycle cleats, what other small, maybe totally overlooked products in our lives might also be quietly reflecting these same powerful global forces?
Where else might a tiny detail be telling a really huge story? Okay, let's get into this. We're looking at some specific source material today.
Yeah, excerpts from cognitive market research on, believe it or not, plastic bicycle cleats.
Right. Sounds super niche, maybe. But what this research shows and what we want to unpack in this deep dive is how these little things actually tell us a lot about bigger shifts in cycling.
Exactly. It's a great lens. So the mission is really to pull out the key insights from these sources.
Yeah.
What's driving this market?
And the sources immediately highlight this kind of core tension. Why are plastic cleats so popular? But also, what are the real challenges they face?
It's not just the obvious stuff. You might think, okay, plastic may be cheaper. And that's part of it, sure.
But the sources point to some, well, unexpected drivers, like
This audio was created with podcastle.ai.
But the sources point to some, well, unexpected drivers, like this big surge in cycling, generally competitive, recreational.
Right, and that includes people maybe you wouldn't traditionally think of. Urban commuters getting serious amateur triathletes.
Yeah.
Folks adopting clip-in systems, maybe for the first time.
And for them, the research suggests plastic hits a kind of sweet spot. Good enough performance, power transfer, but not the cost or maybe the intimidation factor of metal cleats.
Precisely. But then there's the huge factor the report digs into. Indoor cycling?
Yeah. Peloton, Zwift, that whole explosion, especially recently.
Totally. And plastic cleats were just perfectly positioned. The sources really emphasize this. They're compatible with most stationary bikes. They're easy to swap out if you wear them down on the living room floor.
And just cheaper to get started with if you're setting up a home gym type thing.
Yeah, that affordability, combined with how they're made, the sources mentioned efficient injection molding means manufacturers can scale up production pretty quickly. That's key for meeting demand, especially maybe in emerging markets.
Okay, so we've got affordability, comfort, that indoor cycling boom. Those are the big drivers, according to the research.
But like you said, it's not all smooth sailing. The sources are clear about the downsides, too.
Durability comes up, right?
Big time. The report is pretty direct. Plastic cleats just don't last as long as metal ones, especially if you're riding outdoors a lot. High mileage, lots of stress.
So for serious roadies or pros, the research basically says metal is probably still the better long-term bet.
That seems to be the takeaway, yeah.
Yeah.
The faster wear and tear on plastic makes metal more practical for them.
Makes sense. What other hurdles did the research flag?
Compatibility. The sources call this out as a real point of frustration for users.
The classic cycling gear puzzle.
Totally. Look, cleat usually won't work with a Shimano pedal and vice versa. Different systems.
So if you have multiple bikes or switch pedals, it's a headache. The sources flag that fragmentation.
Definitely. And then there's the environmental angle, which is becoming huge everywhere.
Right. What does the report say there?
Well, that standard plastic cleats are, plastic, typically not biodegradable, hard to recycle properly.
And as more cyclists care about sustainability, that becomes a real issue. The research suggests it could actually limit growth.
It could, yeah. Unless the industry comes up with greener options. Which, interestingly, leads to where the market is innovating. The sources see companies responding.
Oh, cool. So how? What are the trends?
Well, directly tackling that green issue. Exploring eco-friendlier materials. Bioplastics, recycled stuff.
Really? Like what?
The research actually mentions early work with things like corn-based plastics, even recycled marine waste. Pretty fascinating stuff, trying to align with that eco-conscious consumer.
That's great to see. What about performance and fit? Anything happening there?
Yeah, customization is another big one the sources highlight. Because plastic is relatively easy to mold, manufacturers can offer more options.
Options for what, specifically?
Things like float that little bit of rotational movement your foot has. Plus, fine-tuning the position, the overall ergonomics. The report says this is key if you're really dialing in your setup for comfort, or trying to prevent injuries, or just maxing out your pedal stroke.
Gotcha. And are they getting smarter?
Yeah.
Any tech integration mentioned?
Yes, definitely. The sources point towards integrating sensors.
Sensors in the cleat. Wow. To measure what?
Cadence, maybe power output, even pedal symmetry, how evenly you're pushing down. The report sees these connected cleats appealing to that tech-savvy cyclist, the data geek, especially relevant for virtual training platforms again.
So putting it all together from this deep dive into the sources, we have this market pushed by cost, comfort, the indoor boom.
Right, but facing real headwinds like durability, compatibility, and the environment.
That's responding dynamically. Innovations in greener materials, better customization, even adding smart tech.
It really suggests plastic cleats aren't just the entry-level choice anymore. The research points to them potentially moving into performance and even sustainability segments as things evolve.
It's a surprisingly dynamic picture for such a small component. Okay, so
Yeah.
based on that push towards eco-materials and smart tech we just discussed from the sources, here's something for you listening to think about. Seeing this evolution in just a cleat, how might the materials and tech in all the gear we use change as what we demand as consumers keeps shifting?
This audio was created with podcastle.ai.